All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? We might have a few more people join us. Hopefully my screen looks as it should, leading your team to success. So thanks everybody for joining us today. This is the fifth and final workshop of the Collaborative Science Initiative. And this one is about leadership and how leadership contributes to healthy and effective teams. So the title, Leading Your Team to Success. The general workshop objective is to help you improve your team process and impact with strong transformational leadership. And actually, we're going to talk about a number of 3 different kinds of models for leadership. So we're actually going to go beyond transformational leadership today. As always, I want to thank the team in the Interactions Core, Chris Peniston, Jennifer Almaraz, and Mariana Coughlin have made all of this possible, and I am so thankful for their help. I also want to thank my team in ICTR, the Institute for Clinical and Translational Research. So I'm Whitney Sweeney, and I'm a scientist in the Team Science Core. I believe I've talked to all of you at some point, so I think we've met before in the course of the series. Alan Brazier is our current director of the Team Science Core. He's actually the executive director for ICTR. And I will like to add in this case that I'll be using a lot of material that was put forward by Alan in some recent publications, so about high functioning teams. And we just had a paper accepted with a few revisions, accepted in JCTS with his leadership models. So I'm excited to share that information. And Patrick Kelly is here, our program manager as well. So I want to just take a minute. I've done this for each session just to take us back from the beginning. This is our last session to kind of bring us together. The very first session, session 1, was about forming teams. And the whole goal of the session, I won't read the slide, I won't go through all of it. But the whole goal of that session was to really advocate for being strategic in how you build your teams, selecting good collaborators, getting to know your collaborators so that you can build the strongest team. The second session was about building that important team culture and generating or fostering psychological safety. Safety where you feel included, where you feel like you can learn and make mistakes, where you can contribute and be heard, and also where you can try out brand new ideas in terms of innovation or alert people when things have gone wrong. The third session was about communication, and we talked about getting to know each other, talking with each other, having the kinds of communications that help create shared mental models. We talked about what those were. Also another type of a shared mental model is a transactive memory system. So this is my jargon. Knowing who knows what on your team, knowing everybody has a shared idea of how the team's going to function. Those conversations are incredibly important, all about getting to know people, getting to know their perspectives, their priorities. It's important to strategically plan your collaborations. If you walk away with nothing else from this series, is to be strategic. You could do something like what we have an intervention called collaboration planning that I'm going to talk just a little bit more about. I've mentioned before, I'll talk more about this session. And then when you have your conversations, using closed loop types of communication to make sure that everybody understands what's happening and they understand each other's ideas. And then the fourth session, the one right before this, was about evaluation and aligning your team to a mission, articulating your project goals, engaging stakeholders, and then selecting the right metrics and defining your research outcomes. So today, after completing this workshop, hopefully you'll be better prepared to apply evidence-based leadership skills and strategies to improve process and innovation in your interdisciplinary collaborations, to identify your leadership needs for specific types of collaborations so that you can achieve more significant scientific impact and innovation, and then to adapt your leadership skills and strategies to meet the evolving needs of ongoing interdisciplinary research collaborations. So I think you're going to find the theme today is that your leadership needs are going to change as your team changes. So what we know is that high functioning teams, we all hope that our teams are high functioning. And what we know is that they need effective leaders. You're all here to learn about that. And effective leaders help align the team towards a common purpose, a common vision. They help to increase satisfaction, role clarity, productivity. They help promote knowledge sharing, team innovation. So you're seeing a lot of those things I mentioned on those review slides. Good leaders help promote these things. They help catalyze the benefits of team diversity for team creativity. And as I was reviewing before this session, I was reminded, looking at this list, that if in this list, you don't see necessarily that the leader of the team is the one doing the work. Obviously, often, especially in research, the leader is involved in the research and involved in the science, but also, and perhaps more importantly for interdisciplinary projects, they're really there to promote, increase, align, and catalyze. They're there to bring everybody in sync. And I recently shared, I had to share this, I recently shared a metaphor about the orchestra or the symphony. And if you think about a team leader as the conductor, he's not actually the one making the music. It's a he in this case. He's not actually the one making the music, but he's there bringing together all the sounds, all the voices in a concerted way to essentially create something new. And I would like for us to think about our team leadership behaviors as doing the same kind of thing, bringing your team together so that voices can be heard, there can be trust, there can be synergy so that you can do something new and innovative on your team. So we're going to talk about 3 different leadership models, and they're listed here, the models that we'll talk about. So the first is transformational leadership, which really hinges on channeling the team members' intrinsic motivation. And so I think Chris touched on that a little bit when she mentioned finding your team members' motivations, that was a favorite thing of hers. And transformational leaders really work to bring together people who can be engaged in the work, who are excited about the work, who want to grow and develop in the work, and that they can align themselves with the team vision. Situational leadership is really a broader overarching category for leaders who can be flexible. And so they might adopt different kinds of styles depending on the needs of their team members and the needs of their team. They might really be motivational at one point, especially when they're getting teams together, but then they might notice that there's a deficit in knowledge. And so they might suggest some training or coaching, or they might delegate tasks at different points. So situational leaders are flexible, trying to meet the needs of the team members where they are. And then shared and functional leadership allows any team member to take the role of leader. And interdisciplinary teams, translational teams that have been together for a while, if they're functioning well, often really engage in that shared leadership. If you think about on truly interdisciplinary teams, it's rare for any one member to be the expert. So if you have a team where somebody's doing radiology and there's a geneticist, and the radiologist may or may not have all the expertise with the genetics and likewise. And so you need people who can step up and take leadership as those needs arise. And so they can share that leadership. We'll talk more about that. So this new paper that just came out advocates for leadership as an evolutionary model. And this is in the context of a translational team, but I do think that this model works well for many teams, even if they're not truly translational. So the model has three general phases. So there's the team formation phase, the knowledge generation phase, which is where you're doing the bulk of the science, and then the translational phase, which is taking the science and creating the intervention, translating that into practice. And if you'll notice here, there are the sort of 3 buckets of leadership as well. So in the formation phase, we typically see transformational leaders. They're creating that vision, they're aligning everybody, they're getting everybody up to speed. The knowledge generation phase is very broad and overarching. And so likewise, you're going to need to have, you're going to need to be flexible in your types of leadership. You might be collecting data, you might be analyzing data, and depending on the things that you're doing in your team, you might find that you have to change the way you're adapting. And the translational phase is usually when teams have been together for quite a while and that shared functional leadership starts to emerge. So we're going to look at these in the context of this evolutionary model. So for transformational leadership, transformational leaders are change icons who inspire with a clear long-term vision, and they serve so others can improve. They embed trust and integrity into the team's mission and purpose. So again, here's that motivation. And there's Bass and Riggio say that there's 4 components of transformational leadership. There's what they call idealized influence, which is where leaders are role models. So maybe, Renee, this is what you were saying to a certain extent about being professional. There's more that goes into it, but by being professional, they can serve as good role models. They do inspirational motivation, where they're there to motivate and inspire. Hey, we're here to help people with UTIs. Chris had a terrific presentation, a panel, organized a terrific panel, and the whole motivation of that panel was to help hear people's stories about their experiences with chronic UTIs. And that was incredibly motivating and inspirational to me. In terms of intellectual stimulation, leaders are there to stimulate innovation and creativity, and then they're there to get to know everybody so that they can coach and mentor them appropriately. So let's think about what's happening in a team when you're in team formation. And you'll notice here on this graphic that the activities of the teams, you're bringing together a team, you're developing your roles, you're managing your team, starting to build trust. Here's hypothesis generation, where you're just getting started with the science. I would also argue, you could say question asking for if you're doing qualitative research, and really working to integrate the disciplines on your team. If you think about the behaviors, the things that the leaders are doing, so these top things are the activities that the teams are doing. If you look at the leader behavior, they're guiding the team composition and establishing the roles for the team and norms. They're helping to facilitate the conversations to make sure that everybody understands, to develop those shared mental models I talked about. And they're working on building trust. Initially on a team, when teams are being formed, that trust starts to be formed from the leader and the team members, and then later branches out to the whole team. Are there any questions so far? No, not yet. Okay. Let's go ahead. For situational leadership, in that knowledge generation part, these are the leaders who are advocates to provide that tailored help. They're aware. You have to be aware of what's going on your team, what resources you have, what needs people have. You have to be agile so you can adapt. You need to advocate for your team members, and adaptive. So if we look at the knowledge generation, looking at this graphic, the activities that teams are participating in, they're actually doing the research, there's additional iterations of the research, they're adapting, they might be bringing on new team members, and again, sharing knowledge. And if you'll notice what the leaders are doing in this case, they're managing their teams, they're monitoring things carefully, getting to know people, fostering that important communication, setting goals. And the leaders have a unique position where they can help to make sense, this sense making, where they can see what's happening on the constellation of the team and help bring that perspective to the team members. Let's jump ahead. And then functional shared leadership is the leader as a completer. The best a leader can do is to observe which functions are not being performed. Effective leadership is task relevant. It evolves as a project progresses. It's distributive, inclusive model that recognizes multiple sources of leadership that can take place simultaneously. And if we take a minute and think about that, here's one way in which to think about the different kinds or the different sources of leaderships in a team. And so you see we have internal versus external. And so we have people on the team versus advisory boards, mentors, champions. And then in the internal part of the team, you have your formal leadership. So you have your PI, maybe a project manager. These are people who said, I'm the leader and this is how things are going to go. And what I'm advocating for, or these teams in that final translational stage in particular, is that effective high-performing teams ultimately have this sort of natural, informal, shared and emergent leadership. So you don't have to be the PI to help the team move forward in its work. You can lead from where you are and you can be have another role on that team. So just to complete the cycle, so we have the activities for the translational stage. Here in particular, we have stakeholder engagement, especially as we prepare for disseminating the intervention. I think we could all argue that stakeholder engagement is actually important throughout the course of the research. Seeking perspectives from all team members, the stakeholders, adapting, integrating this new diversity, and preparing to disseminate the information from the work that the team's been doing. So the leaders are helping to build trust in the whole team. They're working on shared decision making, collaborative problem solving. They're expanding the team diversity, and again, continuing to perspective seek, as I mentioned up here. So here's another framework to help you think about the different kinds of behaviors. So you'll notice when we talk about leadership, a lot of it's about framework and thinking about the behaviors that we need. And there are translational team leadership domains. And actually, some of these should look familiar. This is a slightly different organization, but these are a lot of the things we've talked about along the way. So it's important for teams to have good management. And so that means establishing their roles and responsibilities, setting goals, organizing meetings, all those important managerial project management types of skills. Teams need good communication. Here's that knowledge sharing and transactive memory system I keep talking about. There's an affective component in terms of trust, psychological safety, cohesion, and then collaborative problem solving. And when I first came across this term, I wasn't sure exactly what that meant. But really, there's an element of bringing together the different voices to solve research problems, but also coming together to do sort of continuous quality improvement of your project. So it's sort of an evaluation type of lens under collaborative problem solving. Now, I bring these up, there's not going to be a test on this, but I bring them up because there's another part of those figures that I showed you before that have to do with what the leader is helping the team to do. So we talked about the team activities, the leadership behaviors. Well, what the leader is ultimately helping the team to do during the formation stage is to establish their roles and norms, to develop those memory systems that are important, and to develop their trust in leadership. So we call these team emergent competencies because it's like the conductor helping the orchestra make the music. The leader is helping the team to do these things. So here's the key question that you're probably, so how do they do that? And so there's a lot of different ways that we could do that. But one way to help teams form effectively is to participate in collaboration planning. Now, we have a formal intervention in ICTR that you can participate in completely free, at least for now, but free. And it's a 90-minute session where we walk you through a series of questions. And we help you strategically plan your collaboration. So it can help create a template if you're writing a grant for your multi-PI plan. It can just help you plan things and be strategic about how you're setting things up. And I'm going to jump ahead. We ask questions about what's your team vision, what are roles and responsibilities, how is your team functioning, how are you making decisions and resolving disputes, how are you setting up your social norms, your cultural norms, team outputs. We talked about authorship during one of our sessions. Do you have an authorship policy? And how are you managing your project management and infrastructure? And then in the end, we talk about how are you going to use this plan? So one way for leaders to help their teams is to host these team sessions. We urge the entire team to come. So again, it's that leader as usher, to bring all the team members together to make these decisions together. the teams that function the most effectively are the teams that make these decisions together. And then this brings into mentoring. So effective leaders are good mentors to their team members. So collaboration planning is sort of like coaching the team and helping the team to plan strategically. Good leaders are good mentors. And what makes a good mentor? They serve as advisors, supporters, tutors, masters, sponsors, and models of identity, models of good behavior. Effective mentoring considers that there's a bidirectional relationship between the mentor and the mentee. So if we think about good mentors, here's just some of the things that make somebody a good mentor. A good mentor is accessible, empathetic, open-minded, consistent, patient, honest, and savvy. A good mentor is really there because they care about the benefit, about the experience of the mentee. So they're available, they're there to listen, they're there to learn what motivates them, learn what they need, where they're struggling, and to act as a sounding board for that. And good mentees, so this is the other thing, is to coach your mentees to be good mentees. Your good mentees should be proactive and have foresight. They should be inquisitive, respectful, gracious, generous, and humble. And actually, I would argue that the mentors should also be humble. So, even just ask the question. So, I think all of you are saying that you have different mentoring experiences. How does this resonate with you? Has this been your experience, either as a leader or as a mentee? So looking at the team emergent competencies for the knowledge generation phase, remember I said in the formation, you're developing trust with the leader. And here we're hoping to have that trust with all of the team members, sort of starting to become psychological safety within the team, that hopefully your teams are cognitively diverse and leveraging that well. Here's that transactive memory system, your established roles and norms that hopefully came from a team contract or collaboration planning. And here we're starting to see the emergence of that shared or functional leadership where people are starting to step up just naturally as the team needs them to. And so one of the things that's super helpful, this is sort of an overarching category to help develop these norms and the affect and the culture for a team, are just the general category of team building activities. And I have here 4 different kinds of team building activities. And you'll notice they kind of go along with the 4 different domains, because you can have team building in any interaction. So in terms of management, if you have good constructive meetings about how to establish your goals and make clear what the team member roles are, that'd be one way to get to know each other. Think about, conversations with your team members and asking them what they're interested in, how do they see themselves aligning with the team. It helps you get to know them on a different level so that you can integrate them into the team more effectively. In terms of communication, just during your meetings, working to dissolve your barriers to come to those common understandings that can also help if you're successful, and hopefully you will be, that hopefully that will really help your team grow and develop and become more cohesive. And then I would also argue to a certain extent that some social bonding time is important. And this can take a number of different, this could look differently for lots of different teams. Some of it could be the opportunity for just informal conversation in the lab. I know I used to work in more of a wet lab type when I was in graduate school. We ran animals and learning and memory experiments. And I know that we would just hang out and chat while we were waiting for the experiments to run. And that was a great way to get to know each other. You can do more organized things. I've mentioned in some workshops, game night, or lunches, or different ways to just have an opportunity just to get to know each other outside of work. You find that you might be able to leverage those kinds of things more than seems obvious. And then regular, evaluation, your continuous quality improvement types of meetings, taking the time to say, hey, how are things going? And hearing from everybody's perspective can be another way to help build your team. We've talked a little bit, I think, this came up, conflict resolution. So as you're team building, you're dealing with different perspectives, different priorities, different personalities. And I thought the definition was kind of interesting. So if you think about conflict is a disagreement through which parties involved perceive a threat to their needs, interests, or concerns. And I think phrasing that makes it really hit home, like, why do we disagree about things? Is it because I feel threatened seems very aggressive, but is it that somebody's taking my resources, or is somebody taking credit on a paper and I thought that I was supposed to get more credit? Somebody's taking more time with the mentor and I need that time. So just thinking about conflict as a threat helps you put it in perspective to maybe think about, what is that other person experiencing? Why are they feeling that way? What do they feel like might be taken away from them? And it might help you reframe your conflict as an opportunity for growth and learning. If you think about it as an opportunity to have a conversation, hey, I see you're really upset about this, and I'd really like to know more about your perspective. And that can be quite powerful, especially if that person is willing to engage with you. It's important when you're dealing with conflict to engage with the other person to resolve the conflict, not to win. I know that we've all been in those situations where I'm going to be right. I'm right. I'm always right. But again, if you frame it in a, like, what's going on with the other person? What are their needs? There's actually a conflict resolution type called needs-based conflict resolution. What do they need? How are their needs not being met? How can I find out more about this? And then have a conversation to see if you can have a mutually beneficial resolution. And then sometimes it's helpful to understand your own personal approach to conflict. So here's a diagram that shows some of the different kinds of approaches to conflict. So on the one axis, it's sort of assertiveness, from unassertive to assertive. And then there's sort of cooperativeness, so uncooperative to cooperative. And so you'll see here, this person is avoidant. They avoid, I think we all know those people who avoid conflict at all costs. They're just not going to talk about it. It's all good. Leave me alone. It's fine. Or they just don't bring it up. You just never know that it's bothering them. Then there's other people who are really more about competing to win. And we'll come back to that. And then we jump ahead to the other side. There's accommodating. And typically the definition of accommodating is that what the person who has an accommodating conflict style is, they're willing to give to help the conflict resolve. So that's usually the person who's going to concede and say, yeah, okay, for the better of the team, I'll go ahead and we'll do it your way. I'm going to go kitty corner here. So compromising is where both people give something up. They're both willing to concede and give something up. Collaborating is listening to each other and working for a brand new solution. And I guess some people would say that collaborating is the ideal, but I would say that there is a place for all of these types of conflict resolution, and that you can look through each of them and sort of go in the pros and cons. Like, let's say there's a conflict, but I'm trying to think of one, but stakes are high. Sometimes you just have to accommodate that person and say, you know what, let's do it your way. People are in danger. Sometimes even being competitive, if somebody really knows how to solve that problem, and again, stakes are high, maybe it's important for that person to win. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong, but knowing how you approach conflict can be helpful. And then knowing how your team members approach conflict can be helpful. So for example, I tend to be more accommodating, where I'm much more likely to look at the situation and say, okay, you know what, it doesn't bother me that much. I'll go ahead and concede. And often that works really well. However, the cons to that is that people like me who often are accommodating, we don't always get our needs met. And so that can be tricky. So in one instance, it might be fine to go ahead and, yeah, it's okay, we'll do it your way. But it can be problematic in the long term. Let's see. So if we think about conflict resolution, I'm going to go ahead and go on just for the sake of time. We went through all of these, but the other thing is sometimes conflicts happen that are really, really difficult or almost impossible to navigate on your own. It does happen. And so I guess I'd like to just urge you, don't be afraid to leverage the resources that are available to you in your own organization. So you have your own departmental contacts, whether it's graduate coordinators, department chairs, administrators. If a conflict arises that's difficult to navigate, human resources representatives can be incredibly helpful. Often when you approach them, it's confidential, and they can also be facilitators of conversations if things get really hairy. Here at the UW, we have something that's called the Office of Employee Assistance, and I don't know if you also have those at your organizations, but it's a place where I've actually used their resources on a couple of different occasions. One was a personal issue. They're there if you have was having trouble with an elder relative, and they were there and I could talk to them about finding resources. And then I did have a conflict at work, and then I could talk to them about that. So I don't know if you have those kinds of resources at your universities. I'm guessing you do. So don't hesitate to reach out to them. That's what they're there for. Considering professional development, like workshops like this. And then we have an office that's called the UW Ombuds Office. And again, I'm guessing that you also have similar offices. So these are UW resources, but if those situations arise, again, I would just encourage you to leverage all of the resources that are available to you. Let's see, in terms of translation, these team emergent behaviors, now we're developing psychological safety, so the team culture feels safe to experiment. Transdisciplinarity. So hopefully by the time a project reaches translation, it really has become truly transdisciplinary. So if we think about transdiscipline, so there's one discipline, multiple interdisciplinary. Transdisciplinary is really when you bring the disciplines together and they become something new. And that would be the ideal for any interdisciplinary project. Talking about here, you see a lot of shared leadership and dealing with your collective intelligence. And then here's something that a lot of people don't think about, which is designing projects for dissemination. So we've talked about strategic planning of your project with collaboration planning. We've talked about mentoring agreements, authorship policies. So this is the one that I haven't talked about very much, but designing your research as a leader for dissemination and thinking about how it is you're going to share your findings. And so I like to think of dissemination not just as implementing an intervention, but thinking about what projects you're working on, who needs to know what happens, who's going to share that information. Some of that's authorship, but some of it goes beyond that. It's sort of marketing, if you will, of the findings that you have. So some of the key questions you could ask yourself is, why are you disseminating the research? What are your goals? Some of it's that you want to get publications. We all want to get publications so that we can get tenure and promotion or graduate from graduate school. But there might be other reasons for disseminating the research. Maybe you're helping to promote a new treatment, or you just had a brand new breakthrough that could be useful to the academic community. So thinking about why you want to share the information can be really helpful. Identifying your target audience, thinking about what your key messages are. Again, who will be spreading the messages? How are you going to share it? Many of you are likely publishing in journals that are relevant to your field, but maybe there are certain conferences that are particularly advantageous for you. What resources do you have available? Is there money to send people to the conferences? Is there money to publish? I recently submitted a paper for the first time in a long time, and I was reminded about, because I'm relatively new in this role, I was reminded how much it costs to publish a paper. That didn't happen 20 years ago when I first published my first paper. And then how will you evaluate the success? Is it just that it's published? Is it that people are reading it? Is it people are talking about it? So I don't know, have any of you had a strategic conversation about how to share your findings or how to disseminate your work? So if we were to sum up the way I have in the previous workshops, so familiarizing yourself with some of the leadership styles, we've just scratched the surface today. Identifying the leadership styles, I say your leadership style, but maybe what's working best for you, and assess what needs adjustment. And I heard a lot of that. I heard some really great, thoughtful processing of what's going on in your labs and things that you're thinking about changing. Strategically planning your collaborations, considering collaboration planning or some other sort of team charter. I don't want to make it sound like we have the monopoly on this. We do not, but we would welcome you. But there are other ways to organize your research. Empowering your team members through effective mentoring. So if Petra or any of you that are interested in checking out Simmer and the Entering Mentoring program, please, absolutely, I encourage you to do so. Invest in team building activities and constructive conflict resolution. Engaging in continuous quality improvement with regular debriefing, so checking in with your team regularly. And then considering developing a dissemination plan. So coming back to leadership overall, there was a paradox that was mentioned by Anderton in a TED Talk that he gave recently. Actually, Patrick brought this video to my attention. And the paradox is, the first part is that it's not about you as the leader, that a good leader inspires people to have confidence in the leader. A great leader inspires people to have confidence in themselves. And that being a leader, this is where some people might actually talk about servant leadership, that it's about empowering the team. It's about helping the team become successful in and of itself, helping your team members become successful. And then the paradox part is that it's all about you. So it's about focusing on the others, but then it's about changing yourself. So this quote is, I couldn't change others until I changed myself. So that's the paradox, is looking inside yourself as a leader and thinking about what it is that you can bring and what it is that you can change and how you can ultimately help others on your team be their best selves. For anybody that's interested in diving a little deeper into those leadership domains, there is, I believe it's the Brazier, Burnside, and Rowland paper goes into that in more detail. So if you want to read about the competency supporting high performance translational teams, Alan Brazier spearheaded a review of the science of team science literature, and you might find some more information in there. Again, I would just like to say thank you so much for your time and energy. I know you're all busy, and I really appreciate everything you brought to the session today.